What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. Guys, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. We're going to be announcing our NHL jersey giveaway August 15th, which is our 1 year anniversary. So, this could definitely be the last chance that you have to subscribe unless you decide to subscribe on our 1 year special episode. So, guys, here's a warning in advance. But with that being said, we have a special guest. We have Sheng Peng, the person who writes articles for San Jose Hockey Now. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, good to meet all of you guys.
Thank you. So obviously, there's been a lot of changes in terms of the coaching staff and upper management as well. So we'd like to have your thoughts on the hiring of Mike Grier and David Quinn and Doug Wade.
Oh well, definitely. When the Sharks entered their GM search, I think there was some perception from fans that they were going to hire somebody that was going to protect all the jobs from the past, all of Doug Wilson's hires, and clearly that hasn't been the case with Mike Grier. Mike Grier has definitely come and changed things up, be it with letting Bob Boughner go, letting Doug Wilson Jr., who's the head of scouting, go. Knocking or I guess kicking Tim Burke, who was the assistant GM and has been with the Sharks for 30 plus years, running the draft for a lot of it. Kind of kicking him back out as a scout and not as a director or AGM anymore. So a lot of big changes there for Mike Grier. But I would say in a lot of ways, though, it's kind of as all things change, a lot of it is similar in the sense that because of the Sharks cap situation, Mike Grier hasn't been able to kind of undergo kind of that full rebuild that Sharks fans want. And I think that's what Doug Wilson was sort of hampered by the last few years too. And granted, Doug Wilson put himself in a position with a lot of contracts that he signed, but Doug couldn't start a full rebuild for a couple of reasons. First, because of the long-term contracts that he gave out. Those are not guys that are tradable. And second, because the owner, Hasso Plattner, does not want a rebuild. Hasso is 78, and Hasso Plattner does not want a rebuild, as far as my understanding. If the owner doesn't want a rebuild, then you're not going to have a rebuild. That's where your money's coming from. And so Mike, in his position here, has not been able to kind of start off a full rebuild. And so I think what Mike has done that's slightly different than Doug Wilson, though, is that Mike has put a premium, a focus on a certain kind of player that he wants to bring to San Jose, and players that are highly competitive, that have sort of a compete. Doesn't matter so much the size. I know there's a perception that it's a size thing, but sort of a compete level. And you can see that from guys that they've brought, from Oscar Lindblom to Luke Kunin, and so on down the line. And so I think that's what Grier is doing differently than Doug Wilson, basically trying to stay afloat and stay competitive, even though the reality for the Sharks is that, at some point they're going to have to really step back, and they're going to finally have to use that dreaded R word, rebuild, that they will not
Sure.
use.
Well, I think one of the things to it, obviously, you talked about the ownership not wanting a little bit of a rebuild, and I think they're kind of in a tough position, cap wise, but not only
Sure.
cap wise, like you said, in terms of contracts. They're paying Eric Carlson 11.5 million for the next 6 years. Mark-Edward Vlasic $7 million contracts off the books. We know that they got rid of Brent Burns this offseason as well. But and they're obviously still paying Martin Jones's buyout contract, which lasts until 2026-27. So this isn't a team that at the moment can afford to go into some type of rebuild, just in terms of the fact that a lot of the players that they would have to move to get into that rebuild are just unmovable at this point in time. And so for me, I think it's a question of, San Jose looks like a team to me that's just going to have to kind of retool this as they go along, kind of what Mike Grier's been doing a little bit right now. And, kind of making some small minor deals like he has this offseason. And obviously, I read your article this morning a little bit, or I don't know if it was this morning, but earlier on today, that they asked for a second round pick for James Reimer. So just out of curiosity there, do you think that there is interest in James Reimer? And do you think that they do end up getting the asking price that they're looking for? Or do you think they're going to have to lower that asking price?
Well, first, in terms of the Sharks and what they're doing, the contracts are movable. I think it's a very subtle distinction here in terms of rebuild or not. I think obviously contracts like Vlasic and Carlson are pretty much untradeable unless you attach, a fortune of draft picks, which is stupid because you're just shooting yourself in the foot, spiting yourself, right? To get rid of these contracts. But like Burns, for example, Burns asked to be moved. I think that's a distinction here. A lot of people had said, "Oh, Burns is a sign that the Sharks are rebuilding." No, the Sharks went to Burns. Burns had a 3-team trade list. Carolina was not on that trade list. So Burns had to approve the trade. And basically, Grier went to all of his star players from Carlson to Timo Meier and whatnot, and basically asked, hey, do you guys want to be on board with what I'm doing here? And Burns, Burns is 37, more power to him. Doesn't have a lot of time left, has not won a Stanley Cup. Burns wanted to move. And so that's why the return from Carolina was low, because there's not a lot of teams that could take on Burns' money. And also there's that risk of Burns' age that teams are worried about, even though Burns, at least last year, was still a very good player. But the big distinction there is that Burns wanted to go. I think, though, that if you take more of a rebuild approach, though, yes, Vlasic, Carlson, you can't move. Couture, though, is a good example of a player that you can move. I think if you retain a little bit on him, he's still a very good player, very effective player. A lot of teams would love to have Logan Couture as a second, third line center if he comes at a reduced rate, if the Sharks retain a little bit. That's my thought. And talking to the people in the industry, scouts in the industry, very high opinion of Couture's game still. Another great example of this is Tomas Hertl. Yeah. Team that's rebuilding does not sign a 29-year-old center to an 8-year contract. That's madness. And so those are the kind of couple of decisions there where if you take more of a rebuild approach and you use that that rebuild word, then you don't sign a Hertl, you trade a Hertl and get a good bounty back during the trade deadline, and then you try to move a Couture while he is still movable, like a Burns, still movable. But anyway, on to the question you mentioned about James Reimer. James Reimer's value, if you look at kind of what 1A, 1B goalies have been going for, is a second-round pick. So the Sharks, I don't think, are wrong to want that for him. But is the market there for that? Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. And they may have to kind of step back from their request, because right now there aren't a lot of teams that are clearly looking for a goalie. That one team is obviously the Vegas Golden Knights, who have lost Leonard. But in their case, though, I think that they might, I'm not sure, but I think they might be comfortable starting the season with Thompson and Brossoit if Brossoit is healthy. Now, that's another question mark. If Brossoit isn't healthy, then Golden Knights will be probably desperate for goaltending, because you don't want to start a season with Logan Thompson and Michael Hutchinson as your 1-2. And so we'll see. I think other ways too where the Sharks can sort of get that second round pick, but it's more appetizing for other team is, if the Sharks take a second round pick that's a little farther out, not 2023 and sort of this loaded draft class, right, where a second round pick might be more valuable, but maybe take a 2024 second or even a 2025, because the farther out you get from the closer draft year, those picks have slightly less value. And so that might be a way too for the Sharks to kind of get that full value for Reimer, but it's also kind of a plausible or something that another team would do. But it is a tough spot they're in, though, obviously, because most of the goaltending chairs have been filled. And so, I can't say if they will get what I think their price, their ask is for James Reimer.
Okay. Well, just in terms of that, I think one of the things that's really interesting too in terms of San Jose, I think you mentioned a lot of the guys like Couture, Hertl, Timo Meier. To me, one guy that really stood out to me, at least in the brief moment that he had in San Jose, and then this season, there's a guy like Alex Barabanov who kind of joined San Jose and looked good. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about their prospects. We've seen the Sharks, draft pretty well, I would say, over the last couple of years in terms of some of the prospects that they've gotten. Ryan Merkley's a guy that I think people are expecting a little bit more out of. They drafted Thomas Bordeleau. They've drafted guys like William Eklund as well, who I think are two guys that are going to be huge parts of San Jose moving forward. Jasper Weatherby was another one that looked good in his moments in San Jose, at least from what I saw.
Philip Bysted this year that they drafted.
Yeah, Philip Bysted got drafted this season, 27th overall. So just your thoughts on the Sharks moving forward, at least into the future. They've got themselves. It looks like a decent forward core, at least of prospects, and obviously in net. They acquired Kaapo Kahkonen this during the trade deadline this year, and obviously there was a lot of question marks there. And I'm curious to know if you think that he'll be the starting goalie for the Sharks, this season and potentially moving forward, if that's what they see what the plan is for him.
Oh, but may I say too? I love that pronunciation. Is that the like a French Canadian pronunciation of Jasper? It'd be Jasper. I love that. That's
Oh,
awesome.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think I mean I think that's just how they say it on TV from what
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they
I
don't
just
I
pronounce
try
the
to say
J.
it. I try to say it. I just try to say it the way I think everybody would try to say it. So it's just,
well, I think that's awesome because he has such a cool name. So I like
yeah,
adding a little wrinkle to it. It's already Jasper, which is like this very like a British lord, like English name. But I like that little bit of Jasper. I like that.
yeah,
So anyway, but to answer the question first about Kahkonen, yeah, Kahkonen I believe is seen as a sort of the hope is that he can be sort of the Sharks' future number one. That's why they traded a pretty good player in Jake Middleton for him. And Kahkonen is young. I think Kahkonen is 25,
yeah.
and so this is definitely his time. And I think you can tell that he's sort of seen as the guy because when we talk about the Sharks have three goalies right now that can be seen as NHL kind of 1A, 1B caliber goalies, Kahkonen, Reimer, and Aiden Hill. And Kahkonen's the one that's not in the trade rumors because the Sharks have more or less kind of said, even in a press release, re-signing Kahkonen this past off season. Mike Grier says that, yeah, sees Kahkonen as a potential number one goalie. And so Kahkonen is going to be safe. He's going to get that shot. Whether or not he can sort of fill that role, we'll see, but I do believe the talent is there. Had a very good conversation with Mike McKenna, who I'm sure you guys
Yes.
know about the Sharks goaltending situation on my podcast, the San Jose Hockey Now, and he's very complimentary of sort of Kahkonen's ceiling. And so McKenna said that he does believe that Kahkonen has the highest ceiling between Reimer, Hill, and a Kaapo there. And so so I think we'll see if he can. He didn't quite do that in Minnesota, which is of course why the Wild were willing to trade him. But the ability does seem to be there. Now let's see if he has it between the ears, and if he can kind of withstand 50 game or play 50 or so games at a high level at the NHL level.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool. I think Chris. I know that during the trade deadline, especially, I know that Chris really liked Kaapo Kahkonen. He was high on him in Minnesota when he was there. So I know that Chris, when he saw that trade, was a little bit surprised that the Wild would move a goalie like that. So Chris, just to
Yeah, well, to be honest, a team like the Wild, I know they're. I mean, I guess you could call them rebuilding, even though they made the playoffs this year. But a team like that, where they're trying to get younger and they're trying to build for the future, giving up a goalie like that, who, in my opinion, is going to be a top, maybe 10 goalie in the league, and he's,
Bold
he's very
prediction.
so. Well,
Yeah,
sorry. Well,
Sharks will
yeah,
love
Bold
that.
well,
prediction.
yeah. I think he is going to be a top 10 goalie in the league. I mean, listen, he's 25. Goalies usually, their prime I find hits around 26, so I think this year is going to be a good year if the team around him
Yep.
plays a bit better. And he's a cheap contract. Listen, he's 2.7 million,
yeah, it's
Yeah,
2.75.
2.75.
2.75 million. So great contract there. And hopefully, I mean, listen, I know they're not going in the rebuilding direction, so I mean he'll be somewhat younger compared to the rest of the team, so that could kind of help them out a bit. But yeah, I think you guys got a hell of a goalie in that trade. Like
Well,
San Jose hands down won.
Well, just
well,
like to add to that as well, I think the reason why Kaapo Kahkonen became expendable for the Minnesota Wild is because they have Wallstead, in
Sure.
the prospect pool system. Also, I think they're in a weird situation where they could win now with the team that they have, but also they have the prospect pool to also win in the long term as well. So, they're going to be competitive for the next 10 years or so. So, I mean, it made him expendable, and seeing like Cam Talbot, being traded as well, it shows that like, they're willing to go with a goalie that not in his prime essentially, but, you know, a future Hall of Famer in Marc-Andre Fleury, and having Gus Fitzen as a backup goalie, and obviously there's a lot of cap issues there, so they were trying to unload some contracts already to begin with, so it's understandable. But in terms of Kaapo Kahkonen, I think I was very shocked that they only had to give up Middleton, and I'm not sure if there was a pick attached to that as well, or if it was just a one
Actually,
for
San Jose
one.
got a pick too. They got a pick.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, they got a pick as well. So in my
That's why they
opinion,
won that deal.
yeah, they had Reimer as well, but I never saw Reimer as a clear starting goaltender. I always saw him more as a backup. So having the 1A, 1B dynamic, going on in San Jose made a lot of sense. But I see, Kaapo Kahkonen taking the step forward. And I don't know if there's any prospects in terms of goalies in San Jose right now that could potentially be a starting goaltender one day. But I mean, if so, I mean, it's really Kaapo Kahkonen that's going to be the guy.
Yeah, we'll see what Kakinen, like we'll see if he indeed, becomes a true number one goalie, a top 10 guy. The Sharks swung and missed on Aiden Hill last offseason. They traded a second round pick for Aiden Hill, and they're already picking up another goalie to basically take the reins there, and so hopefully they don't. Hopefully they have it right with Kakkonen. In terms of Sharks prospects and net, well, goaltending of course is kind of hard to predict, of course, right? The Sharks don't have a Wallstead, a Skaroff, a sort of a for sure a prospect goalie of the future there, but they do have some intriguing guys. Ben Gaudreau, who they drafted in the third round in 2021, was the Team Canada starting goalie at the U18s that summer. He's one of them. They just drafted Mason Beaupit. And also too, they signed Strauss Mann out of Michigan, and Strauss has everywhere Strauss Mann has played, even though he's considered undersized at 6 foot for the NHL, he's won and he's played well. And so their goaltending, they have those are some of the interesting names there, but of course we'll see.
And also in terms of the new additions to the San Jose Sharks, so you have Luke Kunin, yeah, Oscar Lindblom, and Nico Sturm. What can fans essentially expect from these players, and why were they brought on?
Well, they fit into what I mentioned about how I think Mike Grier is doing the way that Mike Grier is doing differently. Things differently than Doug Wilson is the kind of the profile of player that Mike Grier is targeting. I can never quite ascertain the kind of the profile of player that Doug Wilson was targeting in the last couple of years with the Sharks. Obviously, all these last 3 years, the Sharks haven't had a lot of cap space, so they really haven't had a lot of options in terms of players to add. But with Doug Wilson, it seemed like maybe there's a little priority on skill and hoping that other areas of the game could be filled in terms of competitiveness, two-way defensive ability, things like that. Those kind of things maybe weren't prioritized quite as high, and so just kind of hoping something would stick. Picking up talented players and hoping that they would stick. But with Mike Grier, there's a clear kind of DNA with these players from Lindblom, Sturm that you mentioned. Matt Benning's another one, right? High level compete from these guys. Also, all these guys are NHL caliber players. They may not be second line, first line, top pairing guys, but these guys are NHL players on any team, basically. Even on the playoff teams, these are third, fourth line players who should play every night, more or less. And so basically, it's sort of kind of raising that bar of the San Jose Sharks of how to make the team kind of, because the last 3 years under Doug Wilson, every rookie pretty much in the San Jose Sharks system has played an NHL game. Guys that you name it. You can look at some of the names that played. Daniel Yurtaikin, Joachim Blickfeld, guys that probably will never see the NHL again. They got their shot and didn't do much with their shot because they're not in the NHL anymore. And so with Mike Grier, that doesn't look like it's going to happen because all the guys that he's brought on are NHL competent players. Now, they may not have the ceiling of some of the guys that Doug Wilson brought on. If for example, last year, if a Jonathan Dahlen hits for the Sharks, then you have a 20-25 goal guy that you're paying, you're paying minimum to. If a skill guy like Joachim Blichfeld was a pretty good prospect for the Sharks for years, great stats with the Portland Winterhawks and also the San Jose Barracuda, but he just never had that compete level. All Blichfeld had was an NHL caliber shot, but really not much will to get into places to get that shot off. But if that guy hits, though, right, then you have a 20-goal guy on your NHL team. But instead of going for sort of the guys with a little more skill, a little more ceiling, Mike Grier is clearly focused on guys that are going to be reliable, are going to provide a certain standard of play, of competitiveness, of two-way play every single night. Again, Nico Sturm, guys like that, but also guys that may have a little more offense than people have expected of them. Guys like Lindblom, Kunin, maybe Sturm too, and so maybe not quite the upside of some of Doug Wilson sort of attempts to build around your core of the Sharks, but more reliable guys. Again, high competitive guys. Guys hard to play against. I know it's a hockey cliche, but one of the things that I can say is that, like last year with the Sharks under Bob Boughner, Bob talked about, we wanted to be harder to play against, et cetera, right? But the truth of the matter was that Bob Boughner was not given a hard to play against team by Doug Wilson. He was given a team that he had to mold into a hard to play against team. Whereas David Quinn will get all these guys again, Kunin, et cetera. David Quinn will get a hard to play against team. These guys, all these guys, are going to be in that realm of player. Now, the question is, will the Sharks actually be a better team with this higher compete level, especially missing Brent Burns and, the 25 minutes he played tonight? I'm not sure if they actually will be a better team in the standings, but I think Bob Boughner would have appreciated having a hard to play against team given to him instead of having to mold one out of a bunch of guys that, that just wasn't their style.
And in terms of David Quinn, once the news broke out that he was being hired by the San Jose Sharks, I saw a lot of people, not being too happy with it, saying that, look what he did with some of the young guys on the New York Rangers, like Lafreniere, Kaapo. And now here he comes, having to deal with relatively a young team, especially with Eklund and Dahlin, being able to have an
Dahlin is gone. They didn't qualify. They didn't even bother to qualify Dahlin.
Oh,
that kind of tells you, honestly, that tells you actually like the direction of a Mike Grier versus a Doug Wilson there. So.
Oh, wow. I thought he was an RFA. They gave him a qualifying offer waiting for arbitration. My bad.
No worries. Yeah, no worries. It just like that's not a player I didn't want to pay attention to. But another player that they didn't bother with was Rudolph Balzers, and they bought him out, and he signed with Florida, right? And that's the kind of player that younger player with some skill that got a lot of chances under Doug Wilson. They hope that Balzers, Dahlin would become a more complete Angel player on top of some of the skill and flash that they had, and that didn't quite happen. And Mike Grier is not even bothering with that. Mike Grier has signed a raft of not oldish guys, but guys who are in the prime of their career, 26, 27, pros. If you want to use sort of that cliche.
Well, I think, well, first of all, Rudolph Balzers is one of the best names in the NHL.
It is.
That's the first thing I'm going to say. But just on David Quinn a little bit, because obviously I noticed something with the Sharks, at least now that I'm looking it up a little bit more. But the Sharks lost, I believe, out of their last 18 games, was it? I think they won 4 out of their last 18 games dating back to the end of the season. And so I think that for me, it was a question of, Bob Boughner, or I don't know how to really pronounce his last name, but Boughner, I guess, or Boughner.
No, it's just Boughner. Yeah.
Boughner. Let's go with that. But Bob Boughner, I think it was very surprising that he was around with the Sharks, because obviously we know that he came in and replaced who did he come in to replace? He had
DeBoer.
That's it. He came in to replace Peter DeBoer, and it was like, okay, we'll give this guy a chance. And I just don't think he was necessarily the right fit for Sharks coaching. And it seemed to me like at the end of the season, he kind of lost the room a little bit. And, you're bringing in a younger coach in David Quinn, and I know that there's differing opinions on him. Some people say, oh, he did really well in college when he was there, and, he took on a lot of really good players. I think he coached Johnny Gaudreau, I believe, in college as well. But I'm curious to see. I think it's a young team with David Quinn that he's gonna inherit here. He's gonna bring in a different mindset as well too. He's got some young guys in Eklund and Borlo that potentially could be two guys that could make the jump. So I'm just curious. Do you think that he lost the room, Bob? I don't know how to say his last name, so I'm just not gonna try.
You can say just Bob Bootlicker, if that's easier to remember. Close enough, right? Or Bob Booger. So
Bob Booger. I
said Burgers. Bob's Burgers.
Bob's Burgers. That's it. We're gonna go with Bob's Burgers. I like that
one. But I've always been sort of. I've always come to Boughner's defense. Like, look, he wasn't given a good team. Nobody was turning the Sharks team from the last 3 years into a playoff team. Everything that kind of could go wrong with sort of the plan, the blueprint of the Sharks after the 2018-19 season when they made it to Western Conference Final, pretty much everything went wrong, right? All their star players got older and worse, right? Erik Karlsson, Logan Couture, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, Brent Burns. Burns, Karlsson, Couture, still good players, but not quite what they were, right? So all those guys declined. Obviously, you have the Evander Kane fiasco. Again, all these things are created by Doug Wilson in a sense, or not created by Doug Wilson only, but he's a big part of it. But they all went wrong too, like sort of a crazy amount of bad breaks, things that some things that you couldn't predict, some things that you could predict, all kind of went wrong. None of the young prospects really emerged, save maybe a couple of defensive guys like Mario Ferraro, Nikolai Knizhov. So basically, your best players are getting worse and older. You're not able to fill around the team in terms of young players taking on secondary roles. So it was a bad team. You could have, brought, Toe Blake, back from the grave. He's not taking the Sharks team. He's not taking the Sharks team anywhere. And so I'm going to say that first for Bob. So in terms of him losing the room, no, I never really quite got a sense of that. Obviously there was that mess with Evander Kane where, Sharks players did not want Kane around in the room. And, I think that there was sort of in the air, there was a thought that maybe Bob Boughner gave Kane maybe a little too much rope that year in 2021, in part because, it was a weird year with COVID and all the restrictions there. Kane was the Sharks' best player clearly in 2021. The Sharks were trying to make the playoffs. And so, so maybe Boughner gave Kane a little too much rope, but Boughner always had, as far as I can tell, the backing of, two of the biggest leaders of the Sharks, Logan Couture and Brent Burns. If you remember Couture, when Boughner got fired from Florida, Couture went out of the way to tweet. Couture tweeted something like, "Oh yeah, it was really his fault what happened in Florida." Now, this is unprompted. It's not, this is not usual for a player to tweet that out about another team firing a coach. And so he definitely had Boughner's back. And Burns, even to the end, Burns' last exit interview as a member of the San Jose Sharks spoke really highly of Bob Boughner. And it's one of the things you can tell that it's not, he wasn't just saying something nice just to say something nice. Okay. And so there could have been other elements in the room that didn't love Bob Boughner for sure. I'm not saying that like everybody loved him. He was a beloved head coach in San Jose. But, I think in any room, right, there's going to be some guys who like you, some who love you. And then, you got to get the guys in between to play hard for you. And I think by and large, at least in the last year, Bob Boughner was able to get buy-in from most of his guys. It just he didn't have the talent to really go much of anywhere with the team.
And speaking about Evander Kane, maybe it's a touchy question, but is it true that he did have a near fight experience with the assistant coach at the time of the San Jose Sharks?
Oh yeah. No, I mean that's been confirmed. Evander Kane confirmed it in his. I think he did a TSN interview after the Sharks terminated his contract before he signed with the Oilers. So that is. Of course, there's different sides of what happened. Bob Boughner says he didn't think it was that serious. Rocky Thompson has not commented on it since it happened. Evander Kane, I think, has said that he just couldn't believe what was happening, so he just kind of played it off as a joke. But definitely something happened there, though. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And also, if you had to choose a player on the current roster to have a breakout season, who would it be?
Oh, okay. Let's see. Finally, a positive question about the Sharks. Let me think about this for a second, because they have so many new players now. I mean, it's just yeah. So I might miss somebody here. Well, I think an obvious one is Kahkonen, obviously, because Kahkonen, I think, is going to get first look to be your starter, and so if he runs with it early in the season, then he's a guy that I think they would hope or would want to play 50 plus games. And if he does that, then yeah, then he's obviously gonna have stats that are going to dwarf what he's done before in Minnesota. Let me see. Up front, I can see Kunin having a breakout season. I know that I know a lot of analytics don't love him, but I think consistently though he's been sort of a grinding guy who has a little bit of a scoring touch, and he's had a couple seasons where he's kind of flirted with, like, at least the averages. He's never scored 20 goals, but if you average out a couple of his seasons, actually not this past season, but the 2 seasons before that, he's actually scoring at a 20 goal pace. And I think that the Sharks obviously don't have a ton of high end forward talent besides Hurdle, Couture, and Meyer. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunity for a guy like a Kunin to play some power play, to maybe flirt with 20 goals or so. And so he's a guy that I can see hitting that if everything works out. Same with Lindblom. Lindblom, before his cancer diagnosis, looked like actually a surefire guy to be a consistent 20-goal guy. That's why the Flyers signed him to that I think it was a 3-year contract. And things have obviously sort of gone awry with him. Maybe in large part because of that's the cancer and throwing him off sort of his development track. But if he can return to the track that he was on before the diagnosis, then he's a guy that definitely can touch 20 goals too.
And I agreed with all your picks because, I was going to mention every single one of those guys, and I guess you took the words out of my mouth. How about you guys? Do you have a player in mind?
I'm gonna say one that I don't know if he's gonna have a breakout year, because I think it's been a couple of years now that he hasn't really lived up to his contract, I would say, or even his expectation. I know he's dealt with a lot of injuries, but Kevin Labanc, he's a guy that when he came into the league, he kind of caught people by surprise a little bit. He's a 6th-round pick, 171 overall in 2014 by the Sharks. He had 40 points in his second year in the NHL. Then he had 56, and there was a lot of hype around Kevin Labanc about, this guy could potentially be a really good top 6 forward for the Sharks. But it just kind of feels like lately, at least over the last couple of seasons, he hasn't reached that potential. Now, obviously, there's been injury concerns with him. Only playing 21 games last year, and the year before that playing 55. Obviously, he had that's a full year. Calendar year with the 55, but this year, 21 games only this season. So I think if he's given an opportunity, if he stays healthy, I think there's definitely potential there with Kevin Labanc. I think he's shown it in the NHL level before. He's a 50-point guy. He's done it before. I think if he's given a right situation and maybe put with the right line mates, I would say, or in a better position, maybe he'll break out a little bit more. But I would say that he's probably the guy that, if there needs to be a guy to break out, it's him. And obviously, I wouldn't say another guy that could break out, but just maybe could go back to kind of close, even though he still is an elite defenseman. I just think he needs to stay healthy. Erik Karlsson's another one that I think could definitely break out. The question with Erik Karlsson doesn't necessarily mean that he's not a good defenseman or that he doesn't have the offensive touch. I think we all know he does. It's just a matter of him staying healthy. If both those guys can stay healthy and play a consistent amount of games this season, we could see, 2 of these guys potentially break out and go back to kind of the players that they were a couple of years ago. So that's the 2 guys that I would say.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Those are both great calls. Karlsson, obviously, the question is really just his health. The first half of the season, he was leading the Sharks in a lot of scoring categories. And if you watch him on the ice, he was having an impact that what resembled, what he used to do in Ottawa and what he did the first season in San Jose. So, yeah so no, there's still a lot of ability there. I don't know if he is like a top 5 guy at his best anymore, but he's still a very, very good player, an elite player if he can stay healthy. And with LeBanc, you hit the nail on the head too, in terms of, I think the question with LeBanc isn't his ability, but it's finding the right fit for him. And they haven't consistently been able to find the right fit for him. And also too, I think LeBanc will need to add to his compete level, things like that, to kind of stay in the lineup too. And so I think those are a couple of question marks that we'll see how he does under David Quinn. But last year he started off the season with Nick Bonino. It just wasn't a good fit in terms of style. I'm not really quite sure why, but Nick Bonino started off. I think the Sharks envisioned Bonino and LeBanc being like the core of a pretty good third line to start last year, and it wasn't a bad idea in theory because Nick Bonino's been a premier third line center, and LeBanc has scored 56 points in a third line role at 2018-19 with Joe Thornton and Marcus Sorensen. So in theory it made sense, but it just didn't work out between those two. Nick Bonino didn't score a point in his first 18 games. And LeBanc bounced from the third line down to the fourth line and eventually had a season-ending shoulder injury. So if they can find the right fit, guys that play well with LeBanc's style, and LeBanc can stay in the lineup and be good enough defensively that Quinn doesn't feel the need to sit him or whatever, then he definitely is a good call. He definitely has the skill level to be one of a great sleeper pick. If we're talking fantasy or whatever.
And Chris, who would your pick be?
Vlasic. No, I'm joking.
No,
Oh God!
You guys showing your Montreal bias there, yeah.
No, but Kaapo Kahkonen for sure. I mean, listen, if this team has any chance of making the playoffs, I mean, they're gonna have to rely on the goaltender stealing some games here. So, and I'm very high on him. So, I think he's gonna have a breakout season. I think he's gonna be one of the top goalies probably this year.
All right, well, that's good. That's a bold one. That's good. That's a good pick, though. Yeah.
I just want to address one of the questions that was in the comments here from Jennifer. She's saying, "How's Eklund's projection going at the moment? Obviously, progression going at the moment. Obviously, we've seen William Eklund. He played 9 games with the Sharks last year. He looked okay. I thought, I was very high on him when they drafted him. I think he's got a lot of potential. I think he's one of those guys that will bring San Jose over the top in the near future." Obviously, didn't stick with the Sharks this season, went to the SHL and, had 14 points in 29 games, just the 1 goal. And obviously he's known William Eklund for his scoring ability a little bit. So just your thoughts on William Eklund. Do you think that this year was maybe just not a weak year, but a step back for him? Or do you think that it was more of a situation where maybe, coming into this season, he'll kind of bounce back and bring himself back to, the top 5 pick that he was I think he was top 5 or top 7 pick that he was this year.
He was 7th.
7th.
No, I think he should be okay. This season wasn't the season overall that he or Sharks fans hoped for. He got sent to a pretty bad situation with his SHL club at Djurgårdens. I think that last year Djurgårdens had 3 head coaches and 2 GMs, over the course of the year. So it was really a chaotic situation. But Eklund, just saw him at development camp. One of the things, if you watch Eklund last year with the Sharks, he clearly thought hockey at a high level, but his body, he was a boy, right? Looked like a boy out there, right? And so he's definitely filled out a bit more. He's added 7 pounds of muscle at dev camp. And to add to it too, he was supposed to go play at World Juniors, the one that's going on right now. But he in the end declined to go because he wanted to focus on his training and, building his strength. And, there was a fear, that he had, that his camp had, that if he did go to World Juniors, that he would get behind. And, the Sharks, all the players they've added, like it or not, these are most of the guys they've added are all NHL caliber players. So the lineup looks pretty full, maybe not great players, not first line players, but still 1 to 12, all NHL caliber veterans for the most part. And so for William Eklund to take that next step and, avoid getting sent down to the AHL, to the Barracuda, if, he felt that, he had to keep focus on working out and building his body up for NHL season and not, taking 2 weeks to a month off to play in this, random summer tournament. So he made that choice, and he made that choice because, he is, it's I guess a sign of his commitment to strictly to making the NHL this year. And so again, he already was showing the gains of strength at development camp. And so, hopefully when we see him in September, I was already joking with him, gain 7 pounds for dev camp, maybe by September, we're going to see another few pounds and a, brand new William Eklund there.
And my final question is concerning, the roster that is seen on paper right now. Are you confident this is the team heading into the season, or do you think there's a prospect or a couple prospects that kind of could push out one of the NHL players that are supposed to start the season this year?
That's a good question. The Sharks have interesting, they have, I wrote about, I don't want to list all the names, but they basically have 10 NHL veteran types that you would expect, would make the team, right? Guys from, star guys like Thomas Hertl to like veteran guys who are just like good role players like Matt Nieto or Nick Menino, right? So they have 10 of those kind of guys. And then they have 9 guys who have pretty good, who will probably younger and experienced guys who will challenge for NHL job. Guys like Steven Lorentz, who they just acquired for Brent Burns, William Eklund, obviously, Thomas Bordeleau, guys like that, right? And so it's going to be, I think, a very good competition, at least up front, for the Sharks this training camp. 1 through 12, 1 through 13 among Sharks forwards. I do think that this could be the best group of Sharks forwards since 2018-19. Now, that's not saying, sounds like a high compliment. It's really not saying that much because the Sharks forward group has been pretty awful in the last 3 years. But like I said, Mike Grier has made it his point of adding just NHL sturdy pros all over the forward group. And so, the kind of prospects, obviously Eklund's going to challenge, Bordeleau, who is excelling at World Juniors right now and showed a lot of a skill last year and is sort of his cup of coffee with the Sharks last year. He's definitely going to challenge too. And, there could be surprise guys, guys that actually played a lot of games last year with the Sharks, like Jasper Weatherby, Scott Reedy, may not make it to the Sharks. I don't think they will actually, at least the way the numbers go right now, and both those guys are waiver exempt, so it'll be fine. But I think that's where we're you might see a forward push the veteran out, but such a deep group of sort of of players there. I'm not mistaking quantity for quality, but there's going to be a lot of competition there at forward. I think in defense actually might be more interesting because the Sharks defense losing Brent Burns with no obvious replacements, there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. And so I can see a surprise guy like Artemi Kenyazev. He's, I believe, a 2019 second round pick, a defenseman with the Sharks. They like him. He has some offensive capabilities. And losing Brent Burns, that's what the Sharks' blue line is missing. Sort of that more offensive side. Obviously, you mentioned Ryan Merkley. So this is going to be Merkley has to kind of seize an NHL job at some point. And a 2018 first round pick, and not just get games because the team is bad, So hopefully he can take that next step. So he's a guy that can push out one of the veterans on defense. Santeria Hadika. I'm trying to remember what round he was drafted. I think he was a 2019 pick too, maybe a 5th or 6th. I don't remember what year, but he's sort of on a more defensive side, but he's a terrific skater, NHL level skater at this point. Just other parts of his game need ironing out, but he's a guy that if he takes a step, he can take an NHL job on defense. So I think on defense is where maybe you'll see more of a surprise because the Sharks again are missing a lot of minutes trading Burns off, and they didn't really address or replace that in any meaningful way.
And guys, do you have any more final any questions or thoughts?
Well, I'm gonna keep the trend going here. You spoke about defense a little bit.
Man,
Of course.
not again.
Of course, every guest needs to hear this question.
Every guest needs to hear this question because it's been a recurring theme on the podcast.
Oh, God.
If the Sharks do have to, make another move, obviously we know that they're interested in trading James Reimer, and they don't really have cap space at the moment. But if they were to clear cap space, do you think a guy like PK Subban would actually be a San Jose Shark? Every single guest that's come on has been asked this question, so we have to keep the trend going here.
Okay.
They've all given the same one too. I'm actually curious to what you're gonna say.
Yeah.
And he
Well,
hasn't signed yet. So like
no, he
we're gonna
hasn't.
keep on
Yeah.
asking this question. Maybe it's good publicity for him, you know?
we're rooting for PK Subban here.
We're like
Okay,
his
so-
agents kind of right now, trying to slip him in teams.
Well, first, I will say the Sharks do actually have cap space when you kind of clear out like guys will get sent back and you build a 23-man roster, and they have cap space pending what happens with Evander Kane, which we haven't talked about, but Evander Kane could be back with the Sharks in 2 weeks, so,
That's true.
with
Yeah, because of
that
the
whole
whole
settlement and all that stuff is going right. So
yeah.
assuming that that he is not back with the Sharks and is basically his cap hit, he's never going to play for the Sharks again, but assuming that his cap hit isn't saddled on the Sharks, they do have cap space. But in terms of Subban, I'm going to say likely not, just because what the Sharks need is a little more offense, obviously. If the Sharks lose Erik Karlsson to injury, which, let's face it, 3 of the last 4 years, that's what's happened. Karlsson has missed extensive time. They have no clear options to take over their power play. Their second best kind of puck mover on that blue line, if you don't count Ryan Merkley, because Merkley is still, not an NHL polished defenseman, at least last year he was not, is Marcus Nudavara. And so that's troublesome, for Nudavara, I think is a pretty good player, but you don't want him running your power play. So obviously this was Subban circa 2017. Well, obviously any team would want Subban circa 2017, right?
Yeah.
But that's the game. That's a part of Subban's game that seems faded quite a bit, right? And so I'm not quite seeing the fit there. But I'm rooting for a PK too. What did everybody else say?
They said pretty much the same thing, but minus you didn't mention the big personality. I feel like that's a thing that's for some reason teams don't like. But
yeah, it's been a turnoff.
I mean, I guess that's possible. Like I don't know the inner workings of how he handled himself in New Jersey. Seems like I didn't hear anything about New Jersey. I know in Montreal there were stories, but I mean, you guys are from Montreal, right? There's stories about everybody in Montreal, right? Good or bad,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So I don't really see that being a quite an issue. I mean, the Sharks have big personalities in Karlsson and Vlasic. They just traded one in Burns, and they didn't trade it because he had a big personality. So and also too, I mean, obviously too, if you're a player and you're not the guy that you were, I think maybe your personality dials back a little bit. And usually, I'm not sure if that's the case with PK, but I would think that that's probably the case in some ways. So I think it's more about, how he can help the team on the ice. And that's the part where I'm not sure if he can help the Sharks too much and where they kind of need the help the most. Now, granted, I think there's been some stories out, like Travis Yost on TSN did a story about worst position groups, or best to worst position groups in the NHL, and he just named the Sharks. I think he named the Sharks the worst defense in the league. So maybe PK can help that, but. Yeah, again, I think though that in terms of the Sharks' needs, though, I'm not quite seeing that with PK. But personality thing, I think I don't know. I didn't hear anything New Jersey that was problematic. So
we'll find a team for PK eventually. Someone will come calling.
If no one's
if no one's calling, I mean, I know ESPN is looking for some hosts. I mean, maybe who knows? Maybe we could hire him. I mean, I don't think we have the budget for that.
We'll get Subban to do our marketing. For us.
I mean, we're giving him marketing here. I mean, it's the least we could get.
Exactly.
Someone's gonna have to represent him.
At least, right? So
if someone's gonna have to represent him, why not us, right? So
exactly.
Can you tell that we're Subban fans?
But we just wanted to say thank you so much, Sheng, for coming on today. We really appreciate it. Obviously, experienced writer like yourself covering the Sharks. It's not the funnest time for the fan base as well. As you know, like the last couple of years, they haven't made the playoffs. So obviously, there's a whole transition going on with the new management, the new regime. So we'll see what happens.
Do you feel bad for the fans? The fans at least can sit out games here and there. I can't.
Yeah. So good luck to you this season. But obviously, I think the most sought out thing that people are looking forward to this year is Patrick Marleau's number being retired at some point during the season. I don't know if they come up with a date yet for that.
Yeah, they have. I think it's February. It's February 25th, 2023. They'll be playing the Blackhawks. kind of unfortunate that that's the your season preview highlight for the Sharks, a jersey retirement. But yeah, things are a little rough.
We wish you good luck, in this upcoming season. And obviously, for any San Jose Shark fans who are watching this video or who will watch this video eventually, what are your thoughts essentially with the team going forward? What can you possibly see moving forward as well in terms of transactions as well? And, who's your breakout star for this season? But with that being said, guys, don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. Thank you so much, guys.